Thanks, Christina. Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, everyone, for joining from wherever you are. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Yep, thank you for joining. So just a quick intro. I'm Boon. You can call me Kai. If you ever see me in one of the UiPath events, feel free to come up and say hi to me. I'm from Simplify Next. I'm based in Singapore. I work mainly on the system implementation side, service delivery side. So we help our customers, with real automation use cases, etc., etc. So me, myself, I am learning as much as you are learning day to day. So, but yeah, today my objective is to partake that knowledge to you. And I hope you can at least take away something useful after this session today to help you in your certification, right? Maybe Marcelo, you'd like to introduce yourself as well
Yes, sure.
before we start.
Hello, everyone. So very briefly, I'm Marcelo. I'm from Portugal, 25 years old, and I've been working on automation space for the last 5 years. And yeah, currently I'm working more as a consultant on automation, so writing RPA consultancy and also trainings on automation. And yeah, briefly, it's that.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Marcelo. Okay, folks, let's begin. I'll cover quickly the agenda for this session. We've broken it down into 5 main bullet points. We don't have a set time for each of these components. I'll try to see the time as we go. But we'll start off with a quick introduction, right? What this session aims to cover in your curriculum, right? In your actual AI Associate Developer Curriculum Program. Which points are we trying to cover in this session? Next, I'll move on to active learning. So what is active learning, right? What is it supposed to replace? Why is it a better approach to training at machine learning extraction models? And yeah, basically the brief overview on this whole feature, right, that you'll be tested on. Then point number 3 is where we are diving deep down into sort of the demos and the hands-on and really the best practices for each of the different components when it comes to active learning, right? So there's 4 main components: build, measure, deploy, and the last but not least is performance or to review the performance of your models. So we'll go through each of these different components in detail. And yeah, and for point number 4, this is more on the point of if you're coming from a solutions perspective, how do we consume these projects, right? Because they are quite different in terms of how the models are trained, how the models are hosted, how we are being charged in terms of AI units. And so all that takes into account how we wish to deploy for our customers, right? And also I'll be showing you how to consume these models, right? So either in Studio Web or in Studio, right? So there's different approaches to this. And last but not least, we'll also be covering Generative, Classifier, and Extractor. So the key components are really when to use them and how to use them, right? As compared to traditional machine learning extractors, or if you're talking about form extractor, etc., all the other methods, right? So when do we use these and how do we use these? Okay. Without further ado, let me just go quickly to the introduction. Okay, so in terms of the curriculum, so all this has been taken from your associate developer curriculum plan. It's all the way at the bottom after Studio, if I'm not wrong. So there will be a few questions. I'm not sure exactly which portion or what's the weightage of questions that will come from this particular section, but mainly we are covering one-click classification, one-click extraction in Automation Cloud. So this is more on the Studio Web portion that you'll see later, right? Leveraging generative annotation. So this is the part or the hands-on that I'll show you during the build portion of active learning. Generative classification, generative extraction, and also as well as active learning, right? So the overview of active learning. I think you should at least be able to understand the core concept of how active learning works and what are its core benefits on top of the classic experience, right? Last but not least, I'll cover a little bit on generative validation, how that works at the field level and how you can turn that on, how you can turn that off during your when you're building your workflows. All right. So that's the gist of today's session. So as we are going through the materials, try to link those materials back to your curriculum so that yeah, you're well prepared for these topics when the questions do come up. Okay. All right, perfect. So we'll start off with overview of the solution, right? What is active learning? What's the modern experience as compared to the classic experience? Basically, active learning is a next-gen AI-powered model training experience, right, within UiPath Document Understanding. So this feature is already in general availability. You can access it right now in your cloud. Basically, how it aims to address or sort of tackle the machine learning training of our extractors is to involve an iterative process that combines both specialized AI and generative AI to perform the training, right? So in hopes of reducing the amount of samples that we need and reducing the amount of time that we need, right? As compared to the classic experience, all parts of the training happens synchronously, right? From the point where you upload the documents, when the documents can be annotated, when the model is trained, all that happens concurrently, right? As compared to your AI-centered approach, if you have been paying attention in the previous sessions, you'll notice that uploading is one step. You have to wait for upload to finish. Labeling is one step, right? And only when labeling is complete, then you can trigger a pipeline to start the training, right? In active learning, that is not the case. The moment you start labeling one document, you can immediately see that the training starts, right? So this whole package aims to reduce the amount of time spent, etc., etc., to, you know, basically allow us to save resources, right? When it comes to these model trainings. Right. So how does it how is it able to do that, right? Really the goal is to, again, like I mentioned, decrease the number of samples, reduce the time and effort, and allow us to track the model performance easily, right? Iteratively. And all this is happening real time, right? There's no need to redeploy projects like what we are doing in Classic. And all that is basically aimed to ensure that anyone can train these models. I'm sorry, are you all seeing there's this scratch across the screen, but not sure how to remove it. But it's
You
okay, we'll
can
continue.
disable annotations when you're sharing screen. If you can go to options and disable.
Sorry, just quick one.
Yes.
Disable annotations.
Yes.
Sorry, technical difficulty here. Annotate. Are you all still seeing the line? I'm not able to. Give me a
Yes.
moment to reshare. Sorry, let me just reshare. Okay. Perfect. Okay. I think we'll continue. Okay, so yeah, so basically the core benefits are anyone is supposed to be able to train the AI models right now. It's a lot more straightforward and simple as compared to your classic experience. The time to when the model is ready for deployment should also be way faster, right? We are boasting a 80% faster rate in terms of model training. It's also going to be a guided experience, and later on you will see how that is so. And it's also a method that we can instantly see the health of the model. And the moment we do any updates to our annotations, all that is updated in real time. Okay, so there's 4 key components when it comes to the modern experience. There's build, measure, publish, and monitor, right? So if I go quickly to the demo that I have here, and you can access this as well through your UiPath Cloud. So if you're interested, feel free to spin up your own instance right now. But you can see on the left-hand side, there's 4 panels, right? So build, measure, publish, monitor. That's basically what this section is aiming to dictate or explain, right? So for the most part, we will spend most of our time in build. This is where we are uploading our documents, doing our annotations, and following the recommendations to you know, achieve the desired outcome. Measure is where we can see the health of our model. It's also where you can have certain sliders and certain sections settings to dictate how your model is evaluated. So that's useful to know, and I'll show you a bit about that later as well. So for the publish portion, this is the equivalent in AI Center when you are doing the deployment or when you're creating the ML skill. And then as for monitor, this is still sort of in preview in terms of most of the functionalities, but what this aims to allow us to do is to really have a view on all the documents that are being processed by a particular project, as well as what are the benefits that have been reaped, right? So what is the time savings, and all that is running behind UiPath Insights, right? So again, all this is part of is still in preview, but it will be in GA soon. Okay, so if you have your own cloud instance right now and you want to, start a demo, simply go to create a project and select the modern experience, and you should see what I'm seeing on my screen right now. Okay. Right, so that covers the introduction of what active learning is, what are the key concepts. So right now we're diving into each of the components already. So the very first one is build. And basically in this section, I'll run through what are some of the best practices for build, how should we approach labeling data, and etc. Okay. All right, so for uploading of data, there's two ways that you can do this, right? So if, let's say for your particular process, you are very certain that you are working only with one document type, then go ahead and just create that document type and drag and drop your samples into that document type. And that will basically skip the classification step, right? But if let's say you're looking more broader term, you are looking to train a classifier as well, and your documents are not sorted, then you can simply drag and drop them into the project, and there will be this automatic classification that happens in the background to try to sort the documents into the respective document types. Okay, so if I go to my sample right now, so this is just a sample project that I have. So this is a Kaggle invoice data set, right? So all this is from Kaggle, it's free. You can get it from GitHub. So a simple way to upload is, like I mentioned, you have your samples over here. If you know what document type they are, so for example, I know that these are invoices, simply copy them, drag and drop them into the document type, and you can see that it's already started processing, right? So in your classic AI Center, what's going to happen is you're going to have a giant window pop up. It's going to tell you the OCR is converting the files into document text before you can even start the annotation, right? But again, what's cool about active learning is, again, all the steps are happening synchronously. So as documents are processing, you can already proceed to label the documents that are already processed, right? So let's say you've already uploaded a few, click on annotate, and this will bring you to this page where basically you can perform some data labeling, right? So this is where your data labeling will occur, right? So there's no need to go to a separate web page like the classic experience. All that is happening in one screen, right? So I'll go ahead and select, under the filter section, I'll select a document that's in progress just to show you sort of what a document that has not been labeled looks like, right? So it'd be easier if I show you on the screen. So if you can see the document here, you can see that on the right-hand side, there's a few checkboxes, right? And you can see that there's already data that is populated in there, right? So this is the generative AI component of this solution for active learning, right? So what active learning has already done for our samples is it has already pre-annotated them with a combination of two approaches. So your out-of-box machine learning models, if the document belongs to an out-of-box model, and also generative AI to perform the validation and perform the extraction as well, right? So anything that is highlighted is something that is potentially of use to us, something that we want to extract, right? So before we confirm the labeling, or rather before a human is able to say that, okay, this is correct, you have correctly identified the data that needs to be extracted, it will be underlined only, right? But the moment you confirm these annotations, right? So what I mean by that is on the right-hand side, you can click the checkbox. For example, if I'm checking for vendor name, Superstore, that sounds correct to me, I'll go ahead and confirm it, right? So then you'll see this checkbox be highlighted. I'll do the same for vendor address. I'll mark it as missing, right? Then I'll go on to billing name. And if I'm happy or I think I've gone through all the fields and I'm confident that they're all labeled correctly, I can simply click on confirm, and that will basically confirm all of the fields that have been pre-annotated by GenAI, right? So what that will look like is it will look like this, right? So anything that is highlighted has basically been confirmed. So before you move on to your next document, just make sure that all the important fields have been highlighted. If anything is not highlighted, then you know that something has gone wrong and you may need to relabel that particular field, right? So just one other key thing to take note as of today, before DocPath LLM is introduced, which is also another section that I'll go into, if your field repeats across pages, just take note that you will have to annotate all of the different instances, right? So what I mean by that is if you have a, let's say, a customer name, right, in your document, if it repeats across all the different pages, you will have to highlight and annotate across all the different pages, right? For the most part, the pre-annotation that is done by active learning will highlight the values that are also in the subsequent pages, but sometimes, from my experience, there could be some values that are missed, especially in the last few pages, right? So do take note of that. Yeah, so that's for annotation. So what happens again, like I mentioned, if you need to relabel, right? Same thing, simply like in your classic experience, simply highlight the field and select the correct field that needs to be tagged to this particular text in your document. Okay. So all the while we've been talking about you know, the out-of-box invoice model. So what if you have a custom model that you need to basically train, right? So at the top right corner here, you have a add document type. Go ahead, click on that. And the first option is always custom. Don't worry if, let's say, you realize that down the line that your document could belong in another out-of-box document type. This, unlike the classic experience, this document type can be changed in the settings in your build, right? So it's fine to just select custom if you're not sure. And you can just give it a name, custom document type, right? And you can start to upload your samples in here, right? So just now I mentioned, if let's say you do realize that your document can fall into an out-of-box document type, then you may want to switch that. Then this is how you can do it. So under the document type, go to the settings, right? And when you go to settings, there is an option for you to select the base model, right? So if you do change this along somewhere along the lines, do note that the fields will revert. And if the fields do overlap with your custom model, then they will be resolved. Otherwise, you know, they will be created. Some new fields will be created, and basically it will restart the training for your particular model. Okay. So that's for custom document types. Again, one other cool feature is if you can see point 5, right? Any subsequent uploaded documents, the active learning GenAI experience will attempt to pre-label them automatically, right? So you can see for things like code number, right? It's a custom field, right? It's not a particularly common field that has been trained for out-of-box models. As you start to label a few samples, you'll realize that the deeper you go, the more samples you start to label. This is automatically pre-labeled for you, right? So that's just something cool about the new GenAI experience for this. And then for point 6, just one other point, DocPath will make training custom models even easier in the future, right? So fret not if you do have some complex documents that need to be processed. Active learning may be able to help you with that. Okay. So I'll jump into a bit about what are some of the best practices for when it comes to labeling, right? So the first thing that I realized when I moved from classic to modern is to always prefix your samples with the vendor name or the layout name, as well as the document type, if you are planning to work with multiple document types in the same project. The reason why I say that is for active learning, because the training process is supposed to be iterative, right? It's supposed to be live in the sense that whatever annotated data is within our build, the model will use to train the model, right? And what that means is there is no longer any batch upload or batching of the documents, right? So in classic experience, you could upload a certain batch, you could name it, let's say vendor A, batch for vendor A, right? On this particular date. And when you're doing the data labeling, you'll be able to filter for that particular batch and perform your labeling there or perform your analysis there, right? But in active learning, there is no longer that option, right? All the documents are uploaded in or labeled iteratively, right? And what that means is when it comes to the filtering, we no longer need that much flexibility in terms of the batching filtering, right? So there are a few options. You can choose to filter by upload date. But what I would suggest again is to make sure your samples are prefixed, right? So again, this could be an example for that, right? So document type invoice, followed by the vendor name, or for this particular person is the person's name, right? So Aaron Hawkins, etc., so that if, let's say, I am facing a particularly poor performance for a particular vendor or a particular layout, I can simply do a search in the bar above and I can see how many samples I have. Maybe I need more samples. Maybe I can deep dive into the individual samples and see if there's any labeling that has been done incorrectly, right? So that is also an option for us. So just take note, for best practice, always prefix your samples. You can build a simple automation to do this file renaming, right? I'm pretty sure you will be able to do that after you've taken all the studio training that you have done, right? Second point, upload at least 30 documents for each document type. So that, and this is more for the not just the classifier. The classifier actually requires about 150 documents in their recommendation, but this is more for training the extraction, right? These 30 documents, take it as like a guideline. It's not a hard and fast rule. And what I mean by that is, if your vendors are sending you documents that are many pages long, so it could be, let's say, 100 pages, then you may not need 30 documents, right? Vice versa. So I would say go from a page perspective rather than a document perspective. And again, always try to look back on the measure portion inside your project, which I will jump to in a bit, but always refer to this page to know what are the next steps, right? And follow the recommendations from there. Besides that, uploaded documents are most of the time automatically processed, right? And as you train more samples, you will see the pre-annotation become stronger and stronger, become more accurate, right? Just make sure that you do validate all the fields. Don't get complacent, right? Make sure that don't assume that all samples will be always 100% pre-labeled correctly, right? So that's what I would say. Mark fields that are not present. So this is, again, same best practice if you were to train the model in Classic, right? Again, follow the recommended actions. And when it comes to which OCR engine to use, this is actually a very popular exam question from my experience and when I took the exam, right? Is what kind of OCR engine to use for different languages, right? So anything that is English, Latin, Hebrew, or Arabic, use the default UiPath Document OCR. In terms of the other languages that are more like Chinese, Japanese, Korean, you would choose to use the extended languages OCR, right? So there is one more OCR that is pretty old that is going to be replaced soon with extended languages, is the Korean, Chinese, Japanese OCR. So just take note, if the exam question does give you these three options, always select either one, right? Either UiPath Document OCR or Extended Languages OCR, and not the CJK OCR. Okay, so if we go back to our project, I'll show you quickly where you can change the OCR engine to be used. So at the bottom left, there is project settings. Click on that. And under the advanced options, you will see what OCR method there is, right? So again, like I mentioned, either select UiPath Document OCR or UiPath Extended Languages OCR. Okay. Right. So let's go back to our project. Okay. Usually at this point, I will stop and ask if there's any questions, but yeah, we'll leave the questions to the end. So take note of those. Okay. So for the measure portion, I will dive quickly into the demo that I have, right? So this is a measure portion for one of the stronger models that we have built on 58 samples, right? So you can see there's a few tabs here. You can tab through each of them to know exactly what are some of the evaluations that have been done, what are the recommended actions, right, in the bottom section here, and what is the overall model health, right? So that's the overall gist of the measure section, and it's really for us to access the model's performance, right? And this is really, in my opinion, is one of the best features for active learning, because if you compare the classic experience, right, to evaluate the health of a model, you'd have to run an evaluation pipeline. Usually that could take ages, right? Sometimes it could take hours, and it's having to wait on that time that sort of impacts the cycle time that we have in terms of retraining the models to achieve a better result, right? So again, for active learning, everything is happening synchronously. So every time you're labeling samples, right, just every 5-6 samples that you have labeled, just come and quickly check the measure portion to see if the health has dipped. Is there any particular layout that is giving your model some trouble, right? And what to do in that case. I'll touch a bit on that later on, after we've covered the measure section, on what to do if, let's say, a certain layout is a bit trickier, right? So there's a few tabs like I've shown you just now, right? So for classification, there's only 2 tabs. So there's factors and there's metrics. And for in terms of the factors, it's train, test, precision, accuracy, recall, and F1 score. I won't go into too much detail about what each of these mean, but you just need to know that the main key factor that we need to look at is precision, accuracy, and recall, right? In terms of F1 score, that's really just a component of both precision and recall. But if I were to go back to a demo that I have a combined project here that has been trained on a few classification. So you can see right here, the model health is quite poor because it's assuming that I don't have enough documents that are being trained, right? So again, it needs me to upload more documents before it can do the evaluation, right? So you can see there's only a train set here. There is no evaluation set. So just take note of that. If you are planning to train a custom classifier, you will need a significant amount of samples, right? And again, as denoted under the measure tab, it's exactly what it's telling you, right? Bills of lading has too few samples. It needs at least 150 documents, right? So as long as you're following along the recommendations, you won't go wrong. Okay, so this is what a healthy or sort of a healthier classifier set would look like in general. And you'll be able to see both the train and the test breakdown of your classifier training. Right. Yeah, I think that's all for the classifier portion. If I move on to extraction, that is where we will be spending a bit more time on it. So again, for the extraction portion, there's 3 main tabs, right? There's factors, there's data set, and there's metrics. So for the factors portion, this is where you'll find the recommendations. For the data set portion, this is where you'll find, again, recommendations on whether you have enough documents in your project based on the number of layouts and based on the complexity of the layouts. And last but not least, you have metrics. So this is the field level statistics of your project, right? So in one glance, I've taken we have some screenshots here to show all 3 tabs, right? So like I mentioned, the factors set is where you refer to if you want to look at what are the recommended actions. For data set portion, this is where you will see what are the how does the data set look like, right? Whether it's sufficient for your particular use case, right? Again, this number of layouts, this is a number that it can be adjusted by you inside your document type settings, right? So depending on the number of vendors you have, you may have to increase this number, and this data set will reflect accordingly what are the number of samples that is recommended, right? So in terms of the metrics, this is where you will spend most of your time trying to debug per se for each field. What is the extraction rating, and why is it that the extraction is so poor, right? So in general, when we are talking about active learning, anything below 80% is considered pretty poor. 80 to 90 is good. 90 to 100 is excellent, or if I'm not wrong, should be 95 to 100. But I would say in general, try to aim for at least 90% before you deploy the model. And let's say you have particular fields that are not performing as well. How can I fix that, right? So how can I fix that? If you go to your project, let's take this for example, right? Inside the build, what you can do is, sorry, give me a moment. What you can do is in the build section, when you go to your data labeling, right? Again, in the data labeling filter is quite different from the overall build filter that you have that is on the previous page, right? So in this filter here, what you can do is you can look for particular field annotations in which active learning has deemed that you may have labeled wrongly, and that is why that particular field may be performing not as well, right? So how you can filter by that is there's this thing called check field annotations, right? So this will be your best friend when it comes to debugging your fields, why the extraction is poor, right? So for example, if let's say if you feel like total amount is not as accurate as you want it to be, right? Is there a reason for that? Simply go to your labeling, select total amount for check field annotations, right? So like it mentions, show documents which have been annotated but may contain annotation errors, right? So when you're done with that, click on done. And this is where you start to analyze every single sample and see where the labeling has gone wrong, right? So for example, this particular sample where the total amount is labeled incorrectly, it's just a slight miss annotation, but you can see that the $ in the subtotal section over here is annotated as subtotal, which is wrong because it does affect the training in some sense because of the positioning, although it is just a $, right? So let's go ahead and sort of undo this wrong annotation, and let's re-annotate the total amount to include this $, right? So let's go ahead and look for total amount. Right, so, and that's that, right? So obviously in a production scenario, it is not as simple as this, but I'm just trying to put the point across that this is what you should do if you face certain fields that are more problematic, right? For regular fields, it's usually quite simple to fix. The trouble comes when you're dealing with line items, right, in your tables. So those you may need to spend a bit more time to maybe relabel the way the rows are represented, right? Especially for multi-line rows. And you may have to think about excluding or including certain text in your labeling to ensure there's more consistency across the different samples, right? So all that should be done through this check field annotations function that is very useful inside active learning. Okay. So if we go back to our materials, yeah, so best practices, at least 10 documents you need before it will give you a project score. And also same for document score, right? So the third point here, you should stop training your model when it reaches your desired performance. This will vary per each use case and your business objectives, right? So again, like I mentioned, the 30 document size upload is a guideline, right? It doesn't mean that you need to upload 30 documents. Go more from the perspective of pages, right? So as long as you've uploaded enough pages, and you realize that your model health is quite good, that is when you should stop. More samples does not mean that your model will perform better, right? So do take note of that. And again, like I mentioned, follow the recommended actions to fine-tune your model, and you should be good to go. All right. Okay, so for the publish section, I won't go into too much detail for this, but basically it's the whole publishing workflow is very simple right now in active learning, right? So simply when you want to create a project version, so obviously this means that there should be enough samples in your document to give you a project score before you do that. So go ahead and click project version, right? Fill in the name, the description, select all the models to include. So this includes both classification and extraction, right? Choose a deployment type. So for this is still sort of a preview function as to what exactly it does when you select the deployment type. So for now, just you can ignore this particular portion and just go ahead and click create. Once created, you will see that in the previous page, I'll go to here, right? So you will see this, I've published different versions, right? You'll see the different statuses, right? So it should be deployed for the most part, right? And that is when you can call your specific models in your studio or studio web to consume this particular model, right? So if it's any other status other than deployed, if you try to consume the model, it's not going to allow you to do that, okay? So in terms of published best practices, just take note that as you are as you are doing the training along the way, right? Because again, like AI, how it's different from AI Center, the training is supposed to be iterative. There is no snapshot of your labeling per se, right? Unlike in classic experience where you have data sets that are segregated by the date that you have exported them. That's not the case for active learning. So do take note, keep track of a training log somewhere to say what kind of updates you have made before you republish your models, so that in case you do have to roll back your changes on the data labeling side, you know where to zoom into, right? As well, just take note when you're using later I'll show you on the hands-on, but how it's different from AI's the classic experience is, instead of going through ML scale endpoints to consume your model, you actually have to specify the specific project name, right? So the project name will be this, as well as the project version in the activity itself to consume the model, right? So that puts us a bit in a pickle, because what this means is every time you update your model or every time you publish a new version of the model, you will have to update your automations, right? But obviously there is a slight workaround around that, is you actually can variabilize the project name and the project version in the activities, and you can choose to use you can choose to maintain the versions and the names either through assets in Orchestrator, or if let's say you're working with multiple projects, multiple project names for different vendors, different layouts, then you can use a mapping table of sorts to try to point to the correct version, right? Okay. Besides that, the other 2 points, I'll leave you to read them. Yeah, so that last point is what I mentioned to tie back into point 1 and 2. So just take note on that. And this is very useful to know so that you don't always have to go back to your studio code to update and republish the code, right? Okay, so the next 2 slides, I will quickly touch upon what is UiPath's recommendation in terms of segregating between UAT and or rather dev and production, right? So the general guideline from UiPath is to use one single project for both build and deployment, right? In terms of what are the reasons, mainly it's related to governance, right? Easier control of the model versions. You don't have to keep moving around data sets between development and production. RBAC in terms of access control, right? So if you try to maintain 2 separate access controls between in 2 tenants in dev and prod, sometimes there could be some mismatch, right? So instead of trying to segregate your access and your roles at the tenant level, do that at the project level, which this is indeed, this will indeed come to us pretty soon, in a few months, right? Besides that, fine-tuning, ideally, if let's say you are working in a production scenario, eventually there will be some validation feedback loop that can be used to retrain our active learning models. For now, that functionality is not yet available for us, right? But that is also another reason why you want to keep everything compact in one project. And besides that, these are just some of the other improvements that UiPath is looking to ensure that it is, we can move towards a single project rather than try to segregate between development and production. Okay. So again, if you want to know more details, just refer back to these 2 slides. Okay, so I'll move on quickly to monitor. So again, these are still in preview, and you do need insights to you do need insights enabled on your tenant to enable this function. But 3 main metrics, right? Project success metrics. So these are more related to ROI. Runtime metrics. So these are more with regards to how accurate the project is, as well as consumption metrics, right? So how are our AI units being consumed? What are the costs? So on and so forth. Okay. So again, this monitor is just a bunch of dashboards that are powered by insights. I won't go into too much detail for this. Then you have the other page of monitor where you have every single process document that is calling this project. It will appear in this overall view. Okay, so that could come useful. Okay, so one other point I like to quickly touch on is to leverage how we can leverage on the hosting benefits, right? So in terms of how active learning is different from the classic experience, active learning actually does not consume any AI units for both training and hosting the model, right? So as compared to classic, anytime you do training, anytime you run a training pipeline, anytime you run an evaluation pipeline, or anytime your ML skill is live, right? Even on the weekends when you're not consuming them, AI units are still being consumed, right? So in terms of overall benefit to customers in cost savings, this is the key driver for them, right? So what this means for us is it allows for us as us on the deployment side, greater customization in terms of segregating the layouts that are more complex, right? It allows us to have a more targeted training across layouts with different fields and naming conventions. And also, if we do that segregation, right, it gives us it gives us better flexibility in terms of the feedback and how we do redeployments for retraining, right? So what I mean by segregating layouts based on complexity, so if you recall, when I was going through the build best practices, what I recommended you to do was to always prefix your documents, right, with the layout version and the vendor name, right? As you are labeling your documents, ideally go down your list of scoped vendors, right? Keep a training record and observe which layout decreases accuracy, right? Again, it may not be pertinent to all use cases. It really depends on the complexity of your use case. But for me, in particular, I've been dealing with quite complex layouts, and this is what I've observed, right? So if a certain layout is giving the model decreased accuracy, that is when it could be a good time for you to pull out that particular data set, right? And load it into another project to see if a dedicated project actually gives us better results in terms of accuracy, right? So again, the second point about achieving targeted training across layouts with different fields, this is more pertinent to documents that have different ways of representing the same information, right? And what I mean by that is, let's take, for example, invoices, right? Under invoices, there is an out-of-box field called part number, right? For most vendors, if they are straightforward, they are not that complex, they are willing to adhere to a specific layout, part number can be part of a single column, right? But if let's say for other vendors, for more complex scenarios, part number actually consists of multiple different columns, and you need to actually perform some data manipulation in terms of creating new rows, doing some sort of mapping, things like that. Then perhaps that will make more sense. These vendors that are more tricky, it makes more sense for you to pull out that vendor and train a dedicated model, right? But again, all this depends on your use case, depends on how much time you are willing to dive into one specific vendor, right? Because all these efforts we're talking about is a vendor-specific effort. So if you have catered time for that, then to achieve the best results, this is what you should try to do, right? So again, documentation is very important. So do document at the vendor level if you have some complex requirements that need to be separated into its own project. Okay, so again, ease of feedback loop. These are just the 3 key steps on how you can extract a data set and upload into another project, right? So as compared to AI Center, it's way easier to export your data set now, right? So let's say you have labeled up to a certain point, you realize, oh, I need to export this particular vendor's data set and upload it somewhere else. Simply go to export, select on export data, and this will generate a data set very quickly for you. Usually within 1 or 2 minutes, you will have it. And it's basically a zip file with the data set that you need to use, right? So you can simply load that into another project, how you would upload your sample documents and start your training from there, okay? Okay, so I will quickly talk about DocPath LLM as well. Actually, we do have some shortage of time because I want to leave some time for the GenAI stuff. So I'll briefly run through DocPath, right? So DocPath is right now it's in public preview, if I'm not wrong, but it's the whole basis of DocPath is again to introduce even more GenAI and LLM capabilities into our document extraction, right? So these are the overall intended benefits or rather benefits that we do expect from DocPath, right? For me, one of the key benefits really is that there will no longer be a requirement to annotate every field instance on all pages, right? So like I mentioned just now, if let's say a vendor name appears in all pages, as of now, you still need to label across all these pages, right? But with DocPath in the future, we no longer need to do that. Another thing to take note is now the names of your fields, how we name our fields will have some impact on the model performance and how the extraction is performed, right? So a general rule of thumb is to avoid non-descriptive names like column 3, column 1, etc., and try to use abbreviations that are well supported or well known, right, across natural language. Okay, so that's for DocPath. Okay, so I have another 9 minutes. I will show you quickly how you can consume your modern projects in Studio X or Studio, right? So I will jump into Studio first, right? So when you come to active learning, under project versions, there is a quick and dirty way that you can consume the model immediately is by opening Studio Web. So when you click this button, what it does is it basically creates a sample workflow in Studio Web. And it's basically pointing to a automatically created storage bucket inside the project or inside your orchestrator. And that storage bucket will serve as a staging area for where you can upload your documents, so on and so forth, right? This framework is quite bare bones at the moment. So I do want to show you something that is a little bit more robust. And the core concept is to use or leverage data service and integration service in your workflow, right? So at UiPath Forward, there has been quite a bit of talk about agentic process automation, right? And using robots as tools to these agents to perform our end-to-end process automation. And in order to achieve that, we need to make sure that our workflows are somewhat modular, right? And so to adopt a modular approach, I would suggest when you are coming up with the design of your process, try to use data service as much as possible, try to use integration service as much as possible, right? So Try to use queues if you can. If you do have unattended setup, use your queues. So a sample workflow like this is quite simple, right? So basically the premise of it is I'll retrieve the entity record by the ID, right? So in terms of the transaction item schema, keep it simple, have the reference and have the data service record ID, right? So these are the two key components. Try not to complicate your queue schema too much, right? Try to make all that customization on the end of the data service, right? So there are some very easy to use out-of-box activities like downloading file from record field, right? So yes, data service, you can store files inside a column. So that is why it is useful to use data service for this purpose, right? So if I go to an example right here, under document extraction data service entity, I have an invoice file, right? Invoice attachment that has already been processed. And what the workflow actually does is it will download the attachment, it will do the extraction, and it will upload the extracted data back into data service, which you can pass downstream for further processing, right? Whether it's invoice posting, two-way matching, etc., etc. So if I go back to my workflow here, so that's what's happening, downloading the file from the record field, right? So this is the activity that is pointing to your document understanding project, right? So look for extract data from document understanding project. And under the two drop boxes here, this is where you would select which model or which project you want to use, right? So for me, I selected invoices, vendor group 1 from my projects listed here, right? So vendor group 1. And then you also need to select what is the version, right? So if I go to my publish page again for vendor group 1, you can see that the version is 1, right? So for some reason, it is being renamed into 1_invoices_ v1. But just take note, there's no real impact. Just follow whatever has been suggested inside Studio Web, right? So the one key drawback for Studio Web is you can't variabilize or dynamically select the project and the version that you want to use, right? Unlike Studio, you can do that, but in Studio Web, you cannot. So what that means is when you do update or publish a new version, you will have to come back into Studio Web to update your project version over here, right? So let's say I go here and create a new project, a new version, right? Now it's trained, I will deploy it. When I come to here, I will need to select the new version here. Otherwise, in your testing, you will realize that it's still pointing to an older version. Okay, so just take note of that. So further down the line, so this is just a right line to show what's the information that have been extracted. For me, I'm using Microsoft 365, so I'm creating a workbook in my M365 instance. I'm adding sheets, and for each extracted result, for each table, I am just writing the data into that Excel, right? So once I'm happy with that, I have the data in my M365. I'd also like to upload it back into data service. So then this is the step where I will upload the file, the invoice details back into data service from my M365. Okay, so obviously there's way easier ways to do this. If let's say you don't go through M365, you can simply put it in a storage bucket and you can upload the file from storage bucket into your data service as well. Or simply, if let's say you don't need the file to be in data service, you can just maintain a path to that storage bucket as well. Okay, so this is for Studio Web. It's modular. It's more modular in nature, right? To prepare us for the agentic future that is about to come upon us. So next, I will cover a bit on the Studio portion, how you would consume these modern projects. Okay, so for Studio, you will need the latest UiPath.intelligent OCR.activities package. So take note that for this package, you do need at least version 23.10, if I'm not wrong. It says 21.10, but I'm quite sure it's 23.10. So just take note of that. If you need to update your Studio, please do that. And you will need the latest version, which is 6.22, right? And when you have installed this new package version, the activity that you are looking for is something called document, same as for Studio Web, document understanding project. And these two activities will pop up. You have your classifier and you have your extractor, right? But the concept is the same. I'll just show you the one for the project extractor, right? So under project extractor, this goes into your data extraction scope, right? So if you have been following along the session that Russell hosted, he would have gone through this portion with you, right? So unlike the machine learning classifier, which is this one, machine learning extractor, sorry, which will be this one, right? So this is the machine learning extractor. Don't be confused. It's a different one. You do want to use the one that says document understanding project extractor, and same concept. This is where you can select the project that you want to use, right? Either using the drop-down menu over here or using the project version over here as well. But the one key benefit if you are using Studio over Studio Web is you can variabilize the project name and the project version. So what this means is, if, like I mentioned just now, if you are maintaining a mapping table of sorts to point to the correct model to use, then you can simply do that in the steps above, right? So you can have, for me right here, I have an example of a DT vendor mapping, just a simple data table that has vendor ID, it has project name, and it has project version, right? So in terms of the vendor ID, I'm maintaining it inside data service. So this is just a simple link queue expression to check whether this particular vendor belongs in my mapping table, and if so, retrieve the correct project name and project version, right? If let's say that particular vendor is not in that list, then I will point the document to a generic model that you can either choose to maintain as a config value in your robot config, or you can choose to maintain it inside your orchestrator assets, right? So these are sort of the things that you may have to consider because of how flexible the hosting is done inside classic, I mean inside the modern experience for active learning. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up the sort of the demo that I have for you. So I hope you have learned to at least know how to consume your modern projects, right? So it's slightly different from how you will consume the classic projects or the out-of-box machine learning extractor. So do take note on that. Again, if you're not sure, just refer back to the recording on and come to this part to know how you can consume the projects. Okay. Without further ado, I think I will hand my time over to Marcelo, which will cover the generative portions in the next 20 minutes, and then we'll try to leave the next 10 minutes for Q&A. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Marcelo, over to you.
Thank you, guys. So just a second. I'll share my screen. Okay. Okay, can you see my screen? So if you can just confirm, please.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So now we'll talk about, well, the generative document understanding activities. And so, but before, well, why use GenAI for document processing? So one of the advantages is the minimal, well, setup. So out of the box, you can already get pretty good results, even with unstructured data, unstructured documents. So by default, even you can already be able to extract data pretty good with GenAI. And then also, usually GenAI shines when dealing with unstructured data compared with other approaches, like using a rule-based that mostly doesn't work because unstructured data is not suitable for these cases, where you use rules like the from extractor or regex-based extractor. Also, the machine learning extractor may require huge training to be able to deal with some kind of unstructured data, while GenAI, by default, GenAI models can already understand the content and extract according to the data that we want from unstructured documents or data. And with that also comes flexibility. So just doesn't work for unstructured data. We can also use for semi-structured or structured documents. So we can have the flexibility to work with any kind of documents, data, even if it's a document, an email, an image. So GenAI can deal with these cases and work for us accordingly. And now talking more specifically on activities. So we have first the generative classification. So with it, as the name indicates, we can classify documents using GenAI. So we define on this activity, as we can see here on the screen, the document types that we expect to process. And well, then the values, so the prompt that will the GenAI model use to understand if the document being processed at the moment is, for example, an employment letter, an invoice, and so on. And very important to mention, these activities are available on Studio Web projects and also on Studio One. So we can use on both sides. And then we have also the generative extraction. So this is to extract data from documents. So it's a kind of question answer model extraction. So basically we define the data to extract, as we can see here. And then per each data, which is the associated prompt that will be used by the GenAI model to find the data and to extract it accordingly. So here we can see here a simple definition. So we defined here the fields and then, well, the prompt to be used by the model. So this is how it works basically. And then this is just like very briefly to talk about. Also, we have the generative validation. So we can, after the extraction, enable the generative validation to get a kind of a second opinion on the extracted data before sending the data for human validation. So basically, well, how it works, the system, basically, the bot prompts the AI to attempt to extract the same data and that was extracted before with other approaches like probably machine learning models and rule-based extraction. And we'll try to extract the same data and either confirm or improve the original extraction before we send the data, probably for the human in the loop. So also it's an option, and also it can reduce a lot the manual effort then required by the users. And so prompt engineering, for sure, it's very important when dealing with GenAI. So the more precise the language provided, the more precise and detailed description, the better. So it's a thing that, for me at least, by experience, it's something that you learn along the time. You work with GenAI models, you'll get better on sending the prompts and understand how to write a good prompt. And so here we can see, like here for classifier, here the details. So for invoice, really giving a prompt that explains the content and what is about the document type in question. And also for, well, for the extractor, be really clear about the piece of data that we want to extract, really precise. That's really important to be sure that we get the most accurate and precise results as possible. And also, I'll just put here on the chat some, docs that I've found on the, well, just a second. Chat. Okay, I'll put here some links, some docs that might be useful for you and you working with this generative classifier and generative extractor activities. So I'm just putting here on the chat so you else can take a look. And so, well, as in the beginning I said, GenAI strength really lies on unstructured document types. So GenAI is ideal for dealing mostly with unstructured document types. So unlike, for example, traditional machine learning models, which mostly need a significant pre-processing and data sets for training. GenAI by default, the current GenAI models can already handle with different formats like free text, image, and mixed content with minimal setup. And so it can understand the context, detect patterns, and extract relevant information without needing, for example, designed rules, and makes it more scalable and well-adapted solution for dealing with unstructured data. And so here we can see here an example of an resignation letter. And so here we can see, well, it's a kind of unstructured data. And here you can see an output, like we have here the sender, the heading, the sender address, so everything categorized accordingly. And now just here for demo time, well, I'll show you now here a Studio Web project that is using the power of the generative classifier and the generative extractor. So initially, I'm loading here a list of files from the storage bucket. So, well, I can show you here the files. So it's here stored. So our invoices, loan application form, certificate, and a fake ID card and a resignation letter. And so I'm loading these files. And for each file, I'll classify a document using a generative classifier. So you can see here, basically, I put here very simple prompts, but we'll see how it will work. So here I'm defining document types. So invoice, loan application form, ID card, and certificate. And here the generative prompt, it will be more extensive and clear, but we will see that even like this, it will be able to classify correctly each document. So I'll just here run the project so we can see the output. And also to mention, well, when you are using these activities on Studio, we could use also the hybrid approach. So we could, for example, for a specific document type, extract data using, for example, machine learning model, some piece of data, and then we could extract also other piece of data with GenAI. So here we can see, for example, this file that which is an invoice was classified as an invoice. So currently, well, I can show here, just remove here this zoom bar. So this file was classified as an invoice, as we can see, it worked well. Then the loan application form was also classified as a loan application form. This is the example. And well, it's yet here 2 files to classify, but here you can see that even with generic prompts here, it was able to classify, but always important to highlight, the better is to always here use a very precise and clear prompts, but as just here a demo, I simplify them a bit. And so here you can see then the certificate as a certificate of fake ID card, which is, well, this image was also classified as an ID card. And well, now it will finish to run. So we can see also the letter was classified as unknown. And why? Because we can see here on the prompt that, well, I don't have here the mapping for letters, not even the document type and the generative prompt. And as any of these document types and prompts were a match for a letter, a resignation letter, it was classified as unknown, so it was not classified. And now to here show you here about the extraction. So here we can see, for example, extracting data from a loan application form. So here, for example, I'm loading, well, the loan application form. And now here on the extract document data activity, which then we can use to use different extractors like the generative one. Here on the prompts, we are defining the data that we want to extract from this document. So here the desired loan amount, the loan usage for. So this data, this one, and also the annual income, including the name of the requester. And so this is what, well, it will extract. So if we save here, and now I'll just here, well, I will just comment these activities so it doesn't take more time to process. So when running, well, we'll see that basically it will log here the extracted data, and also, we'll see how it will extract this. So now it takes just some time to process and extract the data. Just waiting a bit. And also, just while it's running, just show you other samples. So here you can see like the extraction. So requester name, Neville Damir. So here you can see that it's right one. And also, well, the desired loan amount, request annual income, and loan purpose. So here you can see that everything, well, was extracted accurately with precision. And well, and last here, also I have here a simple example. Well, that I will just uncomment and just show you, well, here, well, it's this one, it's for the ladder. So this is to extract data from a resignation ladder. And here, aside extracting, well, well, here show the employee name that sent the resignation ladder. I'm asking also to extract the date, the resignation date. However, here on the prompt, I'm saying to send the data, well, already with a format in this format. So to not extract as is on the document, which we can see here, it's a different one. And well, now I'll save and just run so we can see how it's running. So now it just takes, well, some seconds, but we will see that also we can do the extract, but at the same time already ask the model to format the data. So, well, here we can see like the request invoice extractor, and also the effective date was correctly extract. However, even not just was only extracted, but also was formatted by the GenAI model. So it's also a possibility that we can do with this generative extractor. And now it's time for, well, question and answers. So feel free to, well, to say any question or curiosity around this topic here that we have addressed. You can just raise your hands.
Hey everyone, so anybody can unmute right now, starting this moment. So you can unmute and ask your questions. A lot of questions in the chat as well.
Hi, I have a question
All
for
right.
you
Sorry,
guys.
please go ahead.
Okay, Kai, I had a question in the chat that is about not exactly the field which is coming from document,
Yes.
but
Is
it
it
is
about the
kind of,
commodity code one?
yes, but it should be
Okay, so
part of the training. So
should
if
be
you can
okay.
guide.
Help me understand here. Your commodity code, right? Is it part of the document itself?
No.
Okay, so to me, right, it sounds more like a data transformation, data lookup kind of issue where it's supposed to be performed downstream, right? So you have a part number and you want to look up the commodity code, correct? So rather than, try to get the extraction layer to do some transformation for you, you should ideally do that downstream. That is
Right,
what
I
I would
agree. I
recommend.
agree to that. But what my question pertaining to was that is in downstream post-processing any AI learning we can put in the ML model additionally, because there is no static lookup. It's based on the
Right.
learning.
Yes. I guess you can, but you would have to maintain your own. Again, it will have to be on your own agency, right? You need to maintain your own layer for context grounding, your own DB to have a dynamic DB to go and do the lookup for you, right? So because like you mentioned, it can't be a simple table that you can look up, right?
Mm,
So it has to
mm,
be some sort of a fuzzy match kind of approach. So, but that is, to me, that is aside the extraction portion already. That's more of downstream processing, how you want to do some sort of fuzzy lookup and fuzzy matching for commodity code, correct? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But
So
as a
that is what I would
platform, we
recommend.
don't have any learning capability post-processing, right?
I can add. So Kai, I was also
Yeah.
looking at the chat. So to her question, I think that's where I felt like it was more of a metadata type of thing because
Yes.
it's not a part of the document. So if it's not a part of your document, then you know, like basically document understanding is to extract whatever like what's in your
Correct.
document, so to process.
Yeah.
But
Correct.
you're
Correct.
looking something outside of the document. In that case, like what Kai is mentioning is that like it will be a part of the downstream process. And if
Correct.
you
Correct.
would like to have like, you know, such type of lookup, I would, you know, suggest looking into like building your own model because you need
Yeah.
to understand what's the context. So I think that's where the context grounding will come into
Yes.
play.
Correct.
And you can understand what your business process does. So there are tools that you could use, but again, it's very tied to your business process.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, next question. I'm trying at my best to answer, quickly answer all of your questions. I hope I'm answering them okay. So, yep, next question if we have.
Hi, K.
Hello.
I would ask like how does the retraining work in the active learning, like document understanding model?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
How does the retraining work? Like in classic document understanding,
Okay, that's a good question.
document
That's
get
a good question.
retrained automatically if it's into Action Center. But how does it
Yes,
work in the
correct.
model?
That's a very good question. Okay, so for now, retraining is not supported for active learning, right? So how you would approach retraining is instead of going through classification station or whatever has been churned out by the classification station, right? I mean, sorry, the extraction validation station, upload the problematic documents that have caused the validation station to trigger into active learning and label from there, right? So when you do the labeling, then the model is going to be retrained again. You're going to, republish. And because that whole process is a lot more straightforward as compared to classic, right? We would suggest to go with that approach first. The product team is still looking into how they can incorporate retraining for active learning. But that is a feature that will be in the future. Yeah, I don't think we have a date for that yet. But yeah, that's a good question. Thank you for that. I hope I've
Thank you.
answered that.
And while you were showcasing your studio, like a studio code, it included taxonomy. But in modern approach, I think do we really need taxonomy, or we can directly use activities
Yes,
like
you still need taxonomy if you are trying to consume it in Windows project, right? So like I mentioned just now, the Windows project approach, right? You are using a document extraction scope, which is technically the classic approach, right? It's just that you now have a particular extractor that you can use to point to these modern projects. So the overall framework or the overall DU framework still stands. You still need to load your taxonomy. The only other alternative, if let's say you want to skip loading of taxonomy, is you need to convert your project to cross-platform, which means essentially Studio Web, right? That's when you see in my Studio Web demo, there is no need to load taxonomy. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Kai, on that question about retraining in modern,
Yeah.
is there a way then to pull out all of the documents that went through a validation station
Yes.
or action center? Is there a way to tag all those documents that went to
Yes.
action center so that then you can identify them, segregate them in a folder or something, and then use that
Yes.
grouping for active learning retraining?
I mean, like I mentioned in my presentation, right? Ideally, you'd want your orchestration layer to be managed by queues and data service, right? So what this means is every document should have its own entity record, and you could easily create a column to say, store a Boolean value to say whether the extraction station was triggered or not, right? So that column could be true, false, right? So, and you could have a simple scheduled robot to run every week to pull out all the records where validation station was triggered, right? And you can do a simple loop to upload those samples from your data service into a local destination somewhere in your SharePoint, right? And that's where you can focus your efforts in terms of the retraining. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Hey, I hope I'm audible.
Yes. Hi. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. So I do have a question. So how does active learning impact AI unit consumption compared to classic models?
Okay, so actually, I did want to cover that topic. There is a very detailed guide in terms of AI consumption between classic and modern, but that is still currently I can't show that to you currently yet. But I would say the key differences, like I mentioned, is for your it's way easier to calculate how your AI units are consumed in modern because you don't need to pay for hosting and you don't need to pay for training, right? So in the classic experience, what a lot of customers complained about was they have no visibility on how the AI units are consumed for hosting the models, right? They could have separate ML skills, each consuming a separate amount of AI units, right? But they don't know, they don't have that breakdown. But in modern, in terms of the consumption of the units, you know for sure it is always coming from your document processing, right? So if you're fully consuming your modern project in Studio Web, in cross-platform, the calculation is very simple. One page, one AI unit for everything, meaning digitization, classification, and extraction, right? Regardless of whether you did use classification or whether you did use extraction, it's 1 unit per page for any part of that equation. Yeah. If you're using on Studio, then the calculation becomes a bit more tricky, which if you want to know more, just drop me an email and I can show you a bit more on that. But that's a bit trickier in terms of the calculation. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, any other questions?
Yes. So
Yep.
could you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Go
All
ahead.
right. So when you are you actually write something on the chat regarding the projects that we can create. So and you mentioned that we do not spend in modern approach, we do not spend any AI units on hosting. Then you would
Correct.
say that the best practice is to create projects for the source of the document. So for example, if we know that the source could give us several types of the documents, then we should create a model that contains several types of documents, so the classifier could recognize which type of the document we are dealing with, and then we process the extracting, etc. And if we have, for example, one source that is only giving us the IDs, then we should just create the project separately for that, and then we have the only one type of the document, or is it any other approach that we should do?
Yes. Okay, no, I think I may not have explained that as clearly as I wanted to, but what I mean by separating the models is if we are talking about only one document type, right? So this is more for the use case where you're dealing with very, very complex document types, right? Things like financial statements, invoices that are more on the retail side, right? Because retail invoices, they contain things like sizes, colors, different SKUs, and sometimes you do need a separate model for each vendor because of how different the layout looks and how different in terms of the fields you need to extract before you can do the post-processing and arrive at the final picture, right? So for that reason, that is what I meant by splitting into different models, right? It's basically grouping the different vendors that could have similar layouts in terms of the invoices or let's say financial statements and group them into one model. The more straightforward invoices, ideally, you could lump them all, right? Maybe 20, 30 vendors, you could lump them into one particular project and you could see some high accuracy. But again, all this, you need to monitor the model health, right? To see where you are. But that is what I meant. It's not so much about splitting the vendor where each vendor could have multiple document types, right? Usually that's not the case. If you're dealing with a vendor or when you're dealing with a company, right? Let's say, most often or not, they are either a buyer or they're a seller, right? So if they're a buyer, then the document that you're in most processing with is probably a purchase order, let's say. But if they are a seller, then it would be an invoice, right? So yeah, I hope I clarified on that point.
Yeah, but if we are talking about invoices, let's say, and we have different processes. So we have invoices that came from different vendors, but they have similarities because they contain some services that are similar, but from different vendors. So we have different types of documents, different types of, different structures for that the documents.
Okay.
So I understand that we are doing, for example, project invoices process X, and then we have one document type, for example, invoices, and then we have different vendors in that document type. But if we have, let's say we have other processes that it contains different type of costs, or maybe, for example, I don't know, parts or something like that, then it's not service, it's part, let's say. Should we create another project and then create an invoice there and then train the model in that project? Or should we just add, for example, different type of document, which is also invoice, to the existing model?
I think you can try adding it as a different document type first and see what the health of the model looks like. And if let's say if let's say that the accuracy is not good, then perhaps you'll go with that approach that I mentioned, or that first approach that you mentioned earlier. Yeah. But ideally, to avoid all that technical overhead, right, you want to lump everything together, right? But what I was trying to put across is, in most production scenarios, that is not the case, right? Clients will always come to us with very, very complex use cases, and that's when we need to think out of the box and see how we can help them. But yeah, try to keep it simple, which is your second approach. And if that doesn't work, then go with that first approach. That is what I would recommend. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Andrea, do we still have time for one last question, or?
Let's take one last question and then we can happily close.
All right.
I have one question.
I hope.
Hi.
I have a question. So I have a document with multiple pages. Okay, so out of those pages, only one page has the patient ID card, like a driving license. So I need to identify whether the document has patient ID card or not. So is it possible?
Okay, so for now, okay, I have already answered that question in one of the threads above, but the answer right now is no. We can't handle that. So that's not an extraction issue. That's more of a document splitting issue, right? So previously we did have some endpoints that we could use to perform document splitting, but the product team has taken that back and they are doing some additional work on that. And it will come to us in the future where we will have a component to split documents. But as of now, at the point when you're uploading your documents into active learning, the assumption is that your documents are already split, meaning your ID cards should be ID cards. They should not contain any supporting documents in subsequent pages. Yeah.
Okay. So another question, is it possible to extract the inverted document?
Sorry?
So document is it's not scanned in the right order. It may be in left to right or right to left or bottom to top. It's not in the right order. So is it possible to extract the text from the inverted document?
You will have to perform some sort of pre-processing, as we call it, to make sure the skew is correct before you pass it into the extraction.
Again, the document contains, say for example, I have 3 pages document, okay? Out of 3 pages, only 1 page is inverted, other 2 pages are in right order.
Yeah.
So
again, that is a question more for pre-processing, right? And there are definitely ways that you can achieve that, and there are quite a few solutions out there already, if I'm not wrong, that can check page by page to check the orientation and do the adjustments. But I'm not sure. You can try to check the marketplace, UiPath marketplace, to see if there are components for that. But I'm sure that is something that can help you. But I cannot answer that right now because I don't have the direct answer for exactly what component you can use for that. Yeah,
okay.
Does that answer your question?
I tried with a different OCR, okay, like document OCR, different UiPath OCR as well, but that is no proper result.
I would say you have to tackle that in pre-processing. Try to make sure the orientation is correct before you pass it into extraction. Okay. There was one gentleman that had a question.
Yes, I have.
Yes, correct. Yes. We'll take you as the last one.
Yes, so like when we are dealing with some kind of a form and we do have some checkboxes and we need to extract like in the form of Boolean values. But in data labeling, we do not have like data type as a Boolean. We do have only a text. So in that scenario, how we can like train those kind of a fields in modern design? Because in taxonomy we do have the Boolean, like the when we create the custom field we do have the Boolean, but in document manager we do not have such kind of a Boolean values to extract the checkbox values.
Checkbox values, in my experience, and anyone, if you're familiar with extracting checkboxes, feel free to add in. But from my experience, checkboxes can only be processed if you're using the form extractor, I think, right? So the when you're using the OCR activity, right, there is an option to select whether you want to extract checkboxes. That option you definitely have to keep it checked. But in terms of actually extracting the checkbox as a true false, I think only the form extractor can do that. But let me get back to you on that. If you can just drop me an email. I'm also quite curious to hear on this checkbox extraction, whether an ML extractor can do that, because I'm actually not quite sure. I've not dealt with checkboxes before. But yeah, that's a good question. Please drop me an email and I'll check with the product team for you.
Sure,
okay?
Sure. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much. Really appreciate everyone joining this session. I think me and Marcelo had a good time speaking to all of you. But yeah, Marcelo, any closing statements from you before we hand it back to Andrea?
Share with us what you promised about the specialized AI professional exam and your experience. And Kai, if you wanna also share anything about it.
Yeah, so well, regarding the specialized AI professionals exam, so one thing to say is that, well, I heard that some of you might be worried about if it's a practical exam or question based. So it is mostly, yeah, it's basically theoretical exam, so question based answers. So it's no practical part of building really a bot. So it's mostly so basically based on question and answers, multiple choice, and around that. Well, the topics that you will see, well, it's the ones that we are covering here on the AI series, basically. So AI Center, Document Understanding, Communications Mining. And for me, I would say, for me, what I lacked on the exam, because I underestimated a bit, was the communications mining part, personally, was the part I liked it more. And
yeah.
Almost
same.
Yeah, so don't underestimate the communications mining, because there is a lot of questions around that, and it can you can be very good on the other things, but communications mining questions, at least to me, hurted me a bit, quite a lot on the exam. Even I passed, but well, it hurted a lot. So make sure to study communications mining. It's a newer problem, but it's very important, is what I would say. Yeah.
Correct. I think I will second that. I would say one more tip is to digest the documentation. A lot of the questions will come from the documentation. So you can see that a lot of the points that I've been talking about today have come from the documentation. So especially for communications mining, because if you don't have a data set to do the demos and things like that, you will have to rely on the documentations as your learning material, right? So yep. That's all I have. Yep. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to just post it on the forum chat, and I'll reply to them when I can. Okay.
Thank you, Kai. Thank you, Marcelo, for the session and for sharing your experience with us. Thank you, Priya, for the support in the chat. Thank you all for the questions. Feel free to ask any unanswered questions in the forum thread. I will leave it one more time in the chat. And this is it for today. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, for
Thank
the
you.
insightful
Thank you.